Hi guys, Autistic Guy with a Camera here. If you've seen some of my other Autistic Opinions episodes, you'll see that I enjoy a lot of cartoons like Disney movies, Iron Giant, and the others. But one of my favorites that I think deserves a little more attention is the Teen Titans series that came out in 2003. I didn't watch it when it first came out because I didn't watch much TV then, and I still don't now. But I have been watching it over the last few years, and I must say it's better than the modern versions where they try too hard to make them edgy and modern, and I like it even more than the original comics that inspired it. Why, you may ask? Well, here we go. Number 1. The setting and the tone. The setting of Teen Titans is one we've never seen before, and immediately sets the tone for the show. This isn't the classic Titans, and for me, that's good. They're all vastly different from their original comic versions, and I'll get more into why I like that later. The show is set in Jump City, yeah, kind of a goofy name, but oh well, where Robin moved to start his solo hero gig, as mentioned in the origin episode, Go. It's a little-known city that has no superhuman protectors, and therefore is more vulnerable to attack, leaving the populace with the Titans as their protectors. This works better than other shows where they have every metahuman team living in the same city, like in New York City, they have Spider-Man and the Avengers and everything. And the place falls apart if one team goes down out of all those. And I think it makes more sense that these guys are the only defense against the sort of villains they face. And seeing as Jump City's police department is armed with armor and assault rifles, they've likely maxed out their budget already, so they're lucky to have the Titans on their side. On the topic of the show's style, it has a writing style that knows when to be serious and when to be goofy. Some episodes are just plain silly, like Employee of the Month or Car Trouble, where the scenarios are comically framed and usually over the top. But there are also the more serious episodes, like Masks, that shows how far Robin will go to stop Slade, Truck, that has a pretty realistic and kind of sad perspective on the effects of racism, all without being too over the top and preachy, and one of my personal favorites, Haunted, which I think is the perfect Halloween episode because of how you couldn't tell whether Robin was actually seeing Slade's ghost or having vivid hallucinations stemming from his obsession with taking them down. The animation style also accomplishes this by being darkly colored but with a color palette that can also be easy on the eyes in brighter lit scenes. Like how Raven's cloak is blue but looks a much lighter shade in the light than in the shadows, or how, depending on the lighting, Robin can look darker or brighter depending on how he's feeling. There's also a ton of slapstick and visual gags to be had even in the more serious episodes. Like in The Quest, where Robin's story arc focuses on him seeking training from the True Master in a distant land to defeat a martial artist named Kitaru, with a side story of his friends missing him and goofing around by trying on his spare costumes and imitating him to kind of fill the space he left. It's not only comical, but kind of adorable, especially given his calm response to the whole situation when he got back to the tower. There's a lot of humor to keep the show from getting too dark or dour, but both the comical and more serious episodes are appropriately toned to convey the feelings the writers are displaying to the viewers. It knows when to be silly and when to be dark, making for a much more interesting show than one that is entirely one thing or the other, and I like that. Number 2. The characters. The cast of the Teen Titans is appropriately sized to a small cast of 5 main characters, with a few side characters that show up sometimes for other stories. An interesting thing to note is that unlike a lot of superhero stories, they don't focus much on their secret identities. In fact, Robin appears to be the only character who actually has a civilian life because Cyborg is mostly made of metal. Raven uses her real name and doesn't really have a secret identity. Raven just uses her real name since she doesn't live on our plane of existence. Starfire is a literal translation of Coriander, her name in Tamaran language. And Beast Boy has green skin, which makes him less normal than most people. I find this idea of no secret identities interesting, if not a little goofy at times. Then again, maybe that's why they're so memorable. Let's start with Robin, the leader of the group. In the episode Go, it was mentioned he moved to Jump City to start his solo career, giving him an implied drive to be as good as Batman, but not outwardly stated. He's more serious than he was with Batman, which I take to be a more part of his role as leader of his own team. He takes that role very seriously and usually tries to settle disputes and discord in the team as soon as possible, before it gets too over the top. Some of the time he appears as the straight man of the group, giving his own reactions to his teammates' wacky antics, which I find hilarious because of how non-normal he is compared to the average person. He appears to be finding his own identity as a leader and a crime fighter, taking a lot of things seriously. Like when he feels guilty over things he's done or worries about his teammates' well-being. This makes him an interesting character because people can find him relatable when he's down on himself and doubting his abilities. Not to say he's a total downer, though, because he has a lot of moments where he uplifts his teammates and gives them hope. Like in the episode Nevermore, where Cyborg and Beast Boy were suspicious of Raven because they didn't know much about her, and he responded with, "She's our friend, what more is there we need to know?" It's not only sweet, but it's exactly what a team leader would say to keep the peace. And he has a lot of moments like that throughout the series, where he keeps his friends from turning on each other. His closeness with Starfire is also pretty cute, especially since he's usually oblivious to her deeper feelings towards him, and is either too focused on his work to reciprocate, or doesn't know how to say how he feels. Robin also has an interesting obsession with Slade, much like how Batman has with the Joker, and this makes for a nice heroic character. His arch nemesis has driven him to do things he isn't very proud of, and it drives him to try to be one step ahead of Slade, but still keep his friends safe and the city in one piece, which can be pretty hard to do sometimes and stresses him out. Still, he remains a loyal leader who inspires his friends and acts as a transition between Robin and Nightwing with the lack of wacky puns and general silliness and a leader-type attitude. Makes him ironically the one average guy in the whole team. Cyborg is another reason I enjoy these characters better in the show than in the original comics. Being turned half-robot by his parents to save his life after a car crash, he moved to Jump City after people became too scared of him to go anywhere around his hometown. And seeing as he was already 6 foot tall and full of muscle before his accident, looking like the Terminator with one glowing eye really doesn't help matters. In the origin episode Go, shows him hiding under a hoodie until he joined up with the team, lightened up with a little help from Beast Boy, and became more confident in showing people who he really was. And I love this. A major problem I had with him in the original comics was the fact that the whole first volume of it was him brooding over how insecure he feels not being able to play sports anymore, due to it not being fair on regular people, and how most people are scared of him, which got grating after the first 5 issues it was brought up and it never ended. But in this cartoon, he's a total goof who loves food and fun and goofing around with his friends. And his insecurities about being normal is only ever brought up once in the whole show. Not to mention his friends are all physically able to match him in sports, including a sport he and Beast Boy invented called Stank Ball, which is basically dodgeball with a ball made out of way overdue dirty laundry. He's good friends with Beast Boy because both of them have such silly personalities to cover up their darker pasts, and they play off of each other really well. Like in Stranded, when he had to be reassembled like C-3PO and Beast Boy kept messing it up due to him not understanding the more complicated, sophisticated terminology that Cyborg uses. His stubbornness has gotten him into trouble once or twice, like in Divide and Conquer, when he gets in a fight with Robin and almost quits the team, but he has the determination to keep fighting on and also brings comic relief when necessary. We then have Starfire, who I think is one of the characters I can personally relate to, and another character done much better here than in the comics. Being autistic, I love how she doesn't understand certain things, but is an expert in others. Like how she knows all about history, as seen in Birthmark, when she recites the history of the Zargak nomads entirely from memory, but doesn't know the difference between cotton balls and cotton candy in the episode Sisters. Starfire takes a lot of things seriously, like Spock on Star Trek. Like when she was in a dance club and when asked she was digging the scene, and she said she didn't know she had to bring shovels. It's funny, and with her innocent and sweet personality, it's just adorable. Starfire also has some of the cutest moments on the show due to her love of trying new things, which leads to some goofy moments like her drinking mustard, befriending Raven despite the complete opposites in her personalities, and cooking various Tamaranian foods for her friends with some really silly results. Like when Beast Boy described pudding of sadness as tasting like creamed toenails. She also loves hugs, which gets pretty adorable since she often squeezes the air out of the lungs of the person being hugged. Her crush on Robin is just too adorable, and more tastefully done than in most other shows of the kind, looking at you, Disney Channel. Especially since it leads to some cute moments like when they dance around on the boat in Date with Destiny. Her naive personality is usually played up for laughs, but she's also very supportive and protective of her friends and can uplift others really well. Like in the episode Snowblind, where she encourages Red Star by telling him a way to control his powers by not suppressing them, but rather embracing them. She's overall a very sweet and funny character that I find personally relatable and very silly to watch. And those big green eyes are just too cute. Beast Boy was one of the characters that I wasn't a big fan of at first, but kinda warmed up to. In the official comics that go along with the show, they mentioned he lost his parents in a mudslide shortly after getting his powers, and ended up an orphan who snuck onto the Doom Patrol's hideout, who liked his style and drive and recruited him onto the team, where he worked for a while before going out on his own and eventually joining the Titans. Beast Boy has a more creative and interesting design in the cartoon than his original version, with a more animalistic appearance with fangs, implied fur, and pointy ears rather than being just a plain old human with green skin like in the comics. His role is primarily comic relief, playing pranks and cracking jokes, but as the show goes on, it becomes apparent most of this is to keep himself from getting too serious because of what he's gone through. The story arc with Terra is a good example of how well-rounded a character he is. And he feels a lot more than he lets on, to the point where if he weren't such a joker, I think he'd be in such deep depression he'd need a bottle of antidepressant pills daily. Beast Boy's a vegan, referencing his voice actor Greg Sipes, who's also vegan, which also leads to some very silly moments on the show. Especially since his friend Cyborg practically lives on meat. He doesn't take much of anything except his friends seriously, at times not even taking himself seriously, like in Crash, when he says one of my favorite lines, "I may not be smart enough to know everything, but I'm dumb enough to try anything." This one quote practically defines him as a character, and it's just fun. He and Raven have a hilarious love-hate relationship that reminds me of Spock and Bones from Star Trek, and the two of them get both hilarious and really cute to watch. Especially when Raven hugs him at the end of Spellbound. Speaking of which, we now come to my favorite character, Raven. She's an interesting character who at first we don't know very much about besides the fact that she's a sorceress. Raven comes off as antisocial and stoic at first, but in the episode Switched, where she and Starfire switch bodies, you learn this is because her abilities are linked to her emotions, making it dangerous for her to express herself through them. She's a lot more sympathetic here than in the comics, since she comes off as more caring to her friends in her own way and is usually first to protect them if something goes wrong. She's multilingual and owns a large amount of books on magic and mysticism, showing she's very intelligent and well-read. Raven's stoic personality and deadpan voice, courtesy of Tara Strong, also make for some really funny moments. Like when they're fighting Control Freak and she says, "A couch potato with a souped-up remote. I'm petrified." Her sarcastic humor is pretty fun to see, and a nice change of pace from the more wacky, over-the-top antics of some of her teammates. And this is a pretty fun style of humor for me. Raven also had some really funny moments where she and Beast Boy play off each other's personalities, with Raven sarcastically commenting on some of his wacky antics, and Beast Boy often trying to make her laugh. And the episode Nevermore really shows how Raven processes her emotions by suppressing them, but still cares enough to consider him funny in her mind. Not to mention the time she actually did smile at one of his jokes in the origin episode Go. And in the story arc at season 4, when Raven was going to invade Earth, when Trigon was going to invade Earth, Raven was a delight to see how she helps out her friends and protects them however she can. Definitely a great character and my favorite member of the team. Number 3, the villain. For this part, I'm going to focus on Slade, since there isn't much time in this video to go over every villain in the show, but others like the Hive, the Brotherhood of Evil, and various other villains that show up are really well done for what they are. And sometimes their goals are more realistic than most villains, many of them focusing on taking down the Titans so they can rampage over the city or take over their tower and use it as a main base. Sometimes it goes into robberies or random havoc, like Johnny Rancid and Fractured, but those usually aren't the primary focus. Some are comic relief cretins like Control Freak and Dr. Light. Some are intimidating like The Brain and Fix-It. But I think most of them pale in comparison to Slade, the main villain of the show. His character is very intimidating with his creepy voice, courtesy of Ron Perlman. And like many of these characters, he is so much better than the original version, where he went by the pretentious name Deathstroke. Unlike his comic incarnation, Slade is so much more than just a thug, albeit a physically and mentally enhanced thug, working for the highest bidder. In this show, he's the main villain who works behind the scenes and commands people to work for him, at least in the first season of the Hive 5, that was mostly analyzed their fighting style and let him know he was watching them. Slade has a presence unlike any other villain on the show, and the fact you never see his face makes him all the more mysterious. He's usually one step ahead of Robin and the other Titans, making him really hard to take down. He doesn't care much about money since he appears to have unlimited resources already, instead wanting to take down the city as a whole and the Titans in particular. And he has the intellect and drive to challenge the Teen Titans at every turn, and has the potential to destroy them in every way with his cunning and intelligence. Slade is a master manipulator who can cover practically every loophole in case people betray him. You can see how ruthless he gets with people who work for him, particularly in the episodes Apprentice and Aftershock, where he had safeguards in place for if he's ever betrayed. Another plus is, unlike the comics, you never see his face. He's always wearing the mask, and even in the episodes Apprentice Part 2 and The End, where his mask gets smashed, he grabs half of his face was covering and ducks into the shadows before escaping. And in the latter, his face is a skull because of the magic he used. This makes him, so you don't even see his face then. This makes him more intimidating to me and much more interesting a character. Slade is also the one villain that has evaded capture by the Titans on almost every occasion, leading to Robin becoming obsessed with him like Batman is with the Joker. As the only villain who can match the Titans physically, intellectually, and mentally, Slade stands out among them all, even managing to fool Trigon and get out of his deal with him when he teamed up with the demon for a short time. Out of all the villains, Slade is the standout man, in my opinion, the best villain in the show. The show was nominated for a couple of major awards, including the Annie Awards for Storyboarding and Music and the 2004 Motion Picture Sound Editing Awards, and has a massive cult following, including fans like myself. Unfortunately, it was canceled after its 4th season and got wrapped up with the movie Trouble in Tokyo, which was a pretty good way to tie up some loose ends with Robin and Starfire, with a pretty cute ending and some nice moments to it. And the official comics set in the show's universe are pretty good, with some of them tying off more loose ends in the show and giving more insight into the side characters. And that is why I think the Teen Titans cartoon is awesome. It was a show that I think has held up well over the years and can entertain fans of the franchise today, much better than the modern versions of the characters in my opinion, and still entertaining to watch over the years. This is Autistic Guy with a Camera Productions, signing off.